What happened when the undercover CEO of a medical clinic discovered shocking workplace discrimination on his first day? Favoritism, humiliation, and abuse of power had been ruling the clinic for years, until he decided to step in. Disguised as a medical assistant, he witnessed toxic leadership firsthand, seeing hardworking employees being mistreated while others thrived on connections. But instead of staying silent, he took bold action, exposing the corruption and firing the person responsible. How did it all unfold? Stay tuned for this powerful story about justice, leadership, and the fight for a fair workplace. Dr. Adrian Bennett had spent years leading top-tier healthcare facilities, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness at Horizon Medical Clinic. Appointed as the new director, Adrian had heard troubling reports about workplace toxicity, favoritism, and discrimination running rampant under the clinic's senior leadership. But instead of reviewing reports from a distance, he wanted to see it for himself. His solution? Going undercover. Dressed in simple scrubs, he arrived at the clinic not as a high-ranking executive, but as a medical assistant, blending in with the staff. No one knew his true identity. As he stepped through the clinic's glass doors, he was met with a bustling lobby filled with patients and overworked employees. At first glance, everything seemed professional. Receptionists managing patient check-ins, nurses rushing between exam rooms, and doctors consulting with patients. But Adrian wasn't there to observe surface-level efficiency. He wanted to uncover what was happening behind the scenes. His goal was clear: to identify the gaps in leadership, assess employee treatment, and determine whether the clinic's reputation for poor workplace culture was justified. It didn't take long for trouble to find him. As Adrian approached the front desk, a voice laced with irritation cut through the noise. "You? What are you doing standing there? Assistants should be prepping charts, not loitering," barked a woman in a pristine white coat. Dr. Lisa Caldwell, the clinic's senior physician, barely spared him a glance before moving on. The tone of her voice wasn't just impatient, it was dismissive, unwelcome. Adrian hadn't been at the clinic for more than 5 minutes, and he was already witnessing the problem firsthand. Taking a steadying breath, he reminded himself why he was here. If Lisa spoke this way to someone she believed to be a low-level employee, what else was happening when upper management wasn't looking? Adrian squared his shoulders and stepped into his role, ready to observe, assess, and when the time was right, take action. Adrian barely had time to adjust to his new role before he encountered the true nature of Horizon Medical Clinic's toxic workplace. As he made his way to the staff room, he observed the unspoken hierarchy in action. The receptionists were treated like an afterthought, the nurses were running themselves ragged, and the doctors, especially those favored by Dr. Lisa Caldwell, operated with an air of superiority. It was clear that respect was distributed selectively, not based on competence, but on personal bias. Adrian soon found himself at the receiving end of this system when he was assigned to assist in patient intake. While filling out paperwork, he caught sight of Marcus, a senior nurse with over 15 years of experience, handling nearly twice the workload of the younger, less experienced nurses. His every move was micromanaged and scrutinized, while others were left unchecked. Adrian quickly realized that favoritism wasn't just tolerated, it was the norm. A young nurse, clearly inexperienced, arrived late for the shift change, but instead of receiving a reprimand, she was greeted with a warm smile from Lisa. In contrast, when Marcus stepped away for a brief moment to grab a patient's file, Lisa narrowed her eyes and immediately called him out. "Marcus, do you even take this job seriously? Maybe if you spent more time working and less time disappearing, we'd actually have an efficient system around here." The words were laced with condescension, and Adrian could see the way Marcus clenched his jaw, swallowing a response he probably wanted to give. The blatant double standards weren't just limited to Marcus. During a routine staff meeting, Adrian watched as Elena, the receptionist, attempted to voice concerns about the overwhelming number of patient complaints regarding scheduling errors. Before she could even finish, Lisa cut her off, waving a dismissive hand. "Sweetheart, let the professionals handle the real decisions. Just focus on answering the phones, okay?" The room fell into silence, and Adrian saw Elena's face flush with humiliation, her hands gripping the notes she had prepared. Some staff members shifted uncomfortably, while others smirked, clearly used to this kind of treatment. It was a power play, and Lisa had made her position clear. Some employees mattered, and others didn't. Adrian felt his jaw tighten. He had expected to find issues, but the level of unchecked discrimination and toxic leadership in just a few hours was worse than he imagined. His plan had been to observe for a few weeks before taking action, but as he continued to watch the casual dismissal of employees who deserved respect, he knew one thing: he might not be able to wait that long. Adrian spent the rest of the day silently observing the deep-rooted toxicity at Horizon Medical Clinic, and the more he watched, the more disturbing patterns emerged. Lisa Caldwell wasn't just a demanding supervisor, she was a tyrant in a white coat, wielding her authority to belittle, manipulate, and enforce an unspoken hierarchy that served her own interests. Adrian followed his assigned tasks as a medical assistant, blending in while keeping his focus sharp. Every interaction, every subtle act of discrimination, he committed to memory. By mid-morning, he had already seen enough to confirm his suspicions. The way work was distributed was not only unfair but strategically oppressive. Marcus, who had been with the clinic longer than most, was consistently assigned the most physically exhausting and tedious tasks: preparing patient rooms, restocking supplies, and managing overflow cases, while the younger, less experienced nurses were given lighter workloads and more visible opportunities. When one of the favored nurses botched a procedure causing a patient discomfort, Lisa simply brushed it off with a laugh. "Everyone makes mistakes," she said, patting the nurse's shoulder. But when Marcus politely reminded a doctor about a misfiled prescription, Lisa publicly scolded him for questioning authority and warned him to stay in his lane. Meanwhile, Elena, the receptionist, continued to be silenced and overlooked. When a scheduling error resulted in a frustrated patient complaining at the front desk, Lisa immediately blamed Elena, despite the fact that the mistake had originated with a rush doctor who failed to log the appointment correctly. Lisa's response was to belittle her in front of everyone. "If you can't handle a simple task like organizing a schedule, maybe you're in the wrong line of work." Adrian caught the way Elena bit her lip, her eyes darting around to see if anyone would defend her. No one did. By lunchtime, Adrian overheard hushed conversations in the break room that confirmed his worst fears. Employees were afraid to speak up, knowing that complaints to HR were either ignored or mysteriously disappeared. A younger nurse, speaking in a whisper, admitted that she once saw a colleague try to file a complaint about Lisa's behavior, only to have Lisa herself somehow find out and retaliate by cutting the employee's hours until she was forced to quit. "HR's useless here," another staff member muttered. "Lisa has connections, nothing ever changes." Adrian clenched his fists under the table. This wasn't just bad management. This was an abuse of power. He had planned to remain undercover for several weeks, gathering enough evidence to make a well-calculated move, but how many more employees would be humiliated, overworked, or driven out before then? The day wasn't even over, and already Adrian was questioning whether he could afford to wait that long. By the afternoon, Adrian had witnessed enough. The toxic atmosphere in Horizon Medical Clinic wasn't just an occasional issue, it was systemic, relentless, and intentional. But what finally pushed him to the edge was a staff meeting that perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with the meeting had barely begun when Lisa Caldwell seized control of the conversation, speaking over others and setting the agenda without allowing input. The staff sat around the conference table, many looking disengaged or hesitant, as if they already knew their opinions wouldn't matter. When Marcus, the senior nurse, cautiously suggested a more efficient way to handle patient intake, Lisa let out a mocking laugh. "Marcus, you've been here forever and you still don't understand how things run? Leave the big decisions to those who actually have the authority." The words stung, but Marcus lowered his gaze and nodded, the fight visibly drained from him. Not long after, Elena attempted to bring up a major issue. Patients had been complaining that their files were frequently misplaced or incomplete, leading to delays in treatment. She had prepared notes and even printed patient feedback to support her claim. But the moment she spoke, Lisa cut her off mid-sentence, waving a dismissive hand. "Sweetheart, we don't need a lecture from the front desk. Just do your job and leave the medical concerns to the real professional." The room fell silent. Adrian saw Elena's face turn red, her hands gripping the documents she had carefully prepared. A few nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. Some had seen this before. Others were too afraid to challenge Lisa. But the moment that sealed Adrian's decision came minutes later, when a young doctor leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said, "Well, some people just don't belong here anyway." His tone was casual, but the implication was clear. Rather than reprimanding him, Lisa chuckled and nodded in agreement. Adrian felt his stomach turn. The unspoken rules of Horizon Medical Clinic were clearer than ever. Favoritism dictated success, discrimination was tolerated, and those who challenged the system were quickly silenced. He had planned to wait weeks, gathering more evidence, ensuring that when he took action it would be undeniable. But seeing the humiliation, the fear, and the resignation in his employees' faces made it clear. He couldn't wait. He pushed back his chair and stood up. The entire room turned to look at him. Lisa barely spared him a glance before rolling her eyes. "What now? You have something to say, assistant?" she drawled, clearly irritated. Adrian met her gaze, his voice calm but firm. "Yes," he said. "In fact, we're going to have a very serious conversation about how this clinic operates, starting with you." Lisa let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "And what exactly makes you think you have any say in that?" Adrian took a step forward. "Because, Dr. Caldwell, I'm not just a medical assistant." The room held its breath. Lisa's smirk barely had time to settle before Adrian delivered the words that would shatter her confidence. "I'm Dr. Adrian Bennett, the new director of Horizon Medical Clinic." The room went dead silent. For a moment it was as if no one had fully processed what they had just heard. Lisa's expression flickered, from amusement to confusion, then finally to horror. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, looking around the room as if expecting someone to tell her it was a joke. But no one spoke. The nurses and staff were frozen in shock, their eyes darting between Adrian and Lisa. Marcus and Elena stared in stunned disbelief. Lisa forced out a laugh, though it was noticeably shaky. "You're lying," she scoffed. "If you were really the new director, I would have been informed." Adrian cut her off, calm but firm. "You were informed, you just assumed I was beneath you and never bothered to read the announcement email." He pulled a printed memo from his pocket and slid it across the table. It bore the Horizon Medical Clinic letterhead, along with his official appointment notice. Lisa's face drained of color as she read it. This is ridiculous," she stammered. "You can't just walk in here and start making accusations." Adrian took another step forward, his voice low but unwavering. "I don't need to make accusations, Dr. Caldwell. I've seen it all with my own eyes. The favoritism, the public humiliation, the blatant discrimination, and let's not forget your failure to address patient complaints. You've created a workplace where fear thrives, not professionalism." A murmur rippled through the staff. Adrian could see the mixture of emotions on their faces. Some were still in shock, but others, like Marcus and Elena, were watching him with a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. Lisa clenched her jaw, her fingers digging into the table. "You have no idea how this clinic works," she snapped. "I've been running this department for years. You think you can just walk in and undo all of that?" Adrian held her gaze steadily. "Yes," he said simply. "Starting now." As if on cue, 2 security officers appeared at the doorway. Lisa whipped around, eyes widening. You can't be serious," she hissed. "This is a setup. You planned this from the start." Adrian gave her a measured look. "No, Dr. Caldwell, you did this to yourself." He motioned toward the officers. "You're done here." Lisa shot up from her chair, looking around wildly. "You can't fire me. I've worked too hard for this." Adrian didn't flinch. "And in that time, you destroyed the morale of this clinic. You don't deserve this position." Lisa's fury twisted into desperation, but the decision had already been made. As security stepped forward, she had no choice but to gather her things and leave. The room watched in silence as she stormed past them, her reign of fear finally over. Adrian turned back to the staff. "This is just the beginning. Things are going to change around here." For the first time since entering the clinic, he saw something new in their eyes. Hope. As the door swung shut behind Lisa, a heavy silence filled the room. The clinic staff exchanged glances, a mix of shock, disbelief, and, for some, undeniable relief. For years, Lisa had ruled through intimidation, making employees feel powerless and voiceless. But now, she was gone. The realization settled over the team like a wave, and Adrian could see it in their eyes. things were finally going to change. Stepping forward, Adrian addressed the room. "I know today has been unexpected, but I need you all to understand something. This clinic will no longer be a place of fear. From this moment on, Horizon Medical will be built on fairness, respect, and professionalism." His voice was steady, carrying the weight of leadership. A few staff members nodded while others still looked hesitant. Marcus, who had spent years enduring blatant mistreatment, cleared his throat. "Does this mean real change, not just today, but for good?" His tone carried the skepticism of someone who had seen empty promises before. Adrian met his gaze with conviction. "Yes, and I'm going to start proving that right now." His first action was to reinstate fair policies and make immediate staffing adjustments. Marcus, whose dedication had been overshadowed by favoritism, was officially recognized as head nurse, ensuring that his hard work and experience were finally valued. Elena, who had been repeatedly dismissed and humiliated, was promoted to administrative coordinator, giving her a greater voice in clinic operations. The room erupted in quiet applause, as if the employees were just beginning to realize they were allowed to celebrate positive change. Next, Adrian addressed the broken complaint system. Employees had whispered about HR being useless, but that ended today. He promised an anonymous reporting process, ensuring that every voice would be heard and investigated without fear of retaliation. But he knew policies alone wouldn't fix years of fear and silence. He turned to the staff with a firm yet encouraging expression. "I can put systems in place, but real change starts with you. If you see discrimination, favoritism, or unethical behavior, speak up. I will listen, and I will act." For the first time that day, Adrian saw genuine hope in the eyes of his employees. As the clinic moved forward, Adrian made a point to walk the halls daily, speaking to employees, ensuring that no one felt invisible or unheard. Bit by bit, the toxic culture faded, replaced by something stronger: trust, fairness, and respect. It wouldn't happen overnight, but as Adrian looked around the room, seeing Marcus stand taller and Elena smiling for the first time that day, he knew this was the beginning of something better. As Adrian sat in his office later that evening, he reflected on the extraordinary events of the day. What had started as a simple investigation had turned into a reckoning, a moment where the toxic foundations of Horizon Medical Clinic had finally begun to crumble. He had come here expecting to find issues, but what he had witnessed went beyond inefficiency or poor management. It was a system built on fear, favoritism, and discrimination, where capable employees were silenced and those who abused their power thrived unchecked. But today, that cycle had broken. Lisa Caldwell had believed herself untouchable, certain that her connections and years in the clinic would protect her. But she had underestimated the power of accountability. No leader, no matter how long they've been in charge, should be allowed to rule through fear and injustice. Leadership isn't about status or authority. It's about creating an environment where people can do their best work without fear of humiliation or retaliation. And that was exactly what Horizon Medical Clinic would become under his direction. But real change didn't end with firing Lisa. It had to be deeper, stronger, lasting. Policies could be rewritten, but a culture of fairness had to be built through trust, transparency, and action. The staff had spent years believing their voices didn't matter. Adrian's next task would be to prove that they did, to listen, to take action, and to create a workplace where competence was rewarded, not connections. He thought of Marcus, whose years of dedication had finally been recognized, and Elena, whose intelligence and insight were no longer dismissed. He thought of the employees who had held their breath for so long, afraid to speak up, that silence was over. No one would be ignored again. As he leaned back in his chair, he realized that this story wasn't just about Horizon Medical Clinic. It was about every workplace where people suffered under bad leadership, where speaking up felt like a risk, and where employees felt powerless against corruption. His message to those people was simple. One person can change everything. Whether it's a leader willing to take action, an employee brave enough to speak out, or a team that refuses to stay silent. Change starts when someone chooses to break the cycle. As Adrian looked at the clinic's name on his desk, he allowed himself a small smile. This was just the beginning. The story of Dr. Adrian Bennett at Horizon Medical Clinic teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, accountability, and the courage to stand up against workplace injustice. It highlights that true leadership isn't about power or control. It's about fostering an environment where employees feel respected, valued, and heard. Adrian could have easily conducted his investigation from a distance, but by immersing himself in the daily struggles of his staff, he gained first-hand insight into the discrimination and favoritism that had been poisoning the clinic for years. One key takeaway is that silence enables toxicity. Employees like Marcus and Elena suffered in silence, believing that their voices didn't matter. But change only happens when someone chooses to challenge the system. Adrian's actions prove that one person taking a stand can create a ripple effect of transformation. The story also underscores that bad leadership doesn't just affect morale. It impacts efficiency, patient care, and the overall success of an organization. When toxic leaders go unchecked, talented employees suffer, leave, or disengage. But when accountability is enforced, workplaces become stronger, fairer, and more productive. The biggest lesson? If you have the power to create change, use it. Don't wait. Act.